Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on insights, tips, and tools to deal with COVID effect in your schools. Over the past few months ago, district and school leaders were all forced to deal with the COVID-19 by choosing the new untested directions after weighing alternatives, none of which would be considered optimal. Their recent experiences prove challenges still remain, including health, economic, political, technical activities, and other decisions. In this session, our experts and education leaders are going to share experiences, tips, and tools so the new normal can be optimized for each set of stakeholders in your districts. This session is meant for superintendents, principals, IT directors, counselors, special education professionals, administrators, operations people in schools, district personnel, and educational support group parents, so to help navigate the hybrid environment that will be defined as the new normal as 2020 and 21 progress. So with that, I'm going to introduce today's host, David Radin. You may already know David from one of his nationally syndicated radio shows, Internet Insider or Megabyte Minute, which ran on 400 radio stations, XM, Armed Forces Radio, or you might have worked with David and his team when he was running the communications and membership management systems for the national PTA and many state and local PTAs. David hails from Mount Lebanon in Pennsylvania, Western PA. He's a longtime columnist, has authored 3 books, helped Verizon launch their internet services, and worked with Apple and Motorola on some key product initiatives. He's been involved in technology for communications, teacher professional development, student health, as well as working in adult education. He has an MBA from Duke, a BS from Yale, and as a Dale Carnegie certified consultant, he serves on advisory boards for both Penn State University and Health IT Pittsburgh. His current company, Confirmed, has created an advanced scheduling product that has positive implications for a number of tasks in schools, including IEPs, individual education plans, facilities, parent-teacher meetings, and so much more. And I think about Confirmed is sponsoring this webinar. When I think about Confirmed, I think about it from a coordinated school health perspective, the positive behavioral implications it can provide for students in schools. As we think about coordinated school health, I think that one of the focus points we'll see more in the coming months and year will be on the component of counseling and psychological services in schools and the development of those individual education plans and following up with those as kids are forced to be in a different kind of environment without the social interaction of their colleagues, their fellow students, and so forth. And schools most certainly are probably already seeing some of those implications and some of how that's going to change, I'm sure. So I just want to say a quick thank you to the M-Masters Corporation and the Cloud Adoption Solutions for also helping to enable this and the other sessions of the COVID Economy Leadership Forum as these webinars will continue. And just a real quick mention before I turn this over to David, we will be supplying contact info and links for everyone after the session. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to David Radin. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for such a great introduction as well. But, really, we've got a panel of people who I consider experts. Expertise is not something that you can really call yourself. You can't call yourself an expert. But the people who we have here today on this panel are people that are called expert by other people. So that makes them experts. And what you're going to find out today is that they've got expertise to share that'll be very helpful to you. But they're not the stars here today. The stars today are you, the participants, the people here who have come in order to be able to do better with their students and with their districts and with their schools. The people who are out there in the trenches, and you know who you are, whether you're a super or a principal or in special ed or a teacher or what have you. We know that you've been fighting the battle. And for some of you, the battle has been tremendously difficult. For those of you who are in large school districts, we know of districts that have been going to distance learning. And those are both large and small, but think about from a large district standpoint, how you're turning to technology companies, because the technology is what you need to do remote learning, to do distance learning, which is still fairly new to many of us, and which the technology needs to empower. And we're finding that we're reaching the limits of what the technology was meant to do. Why? Maybe because our school districts are too big, and the particular, and even the biggest technology vendors such as Blackboard and Google are having some problems handling the large districts and their need for technology on a very, very large scale these days. So that makes it very difficult. There are many districts who have to move to remote learning but don't have enough laptops, or can't get connectivity to the students because the students either can't afford it, or perhaps it's not in their neighborhood or in their geography. That's a challenge that you as educators and administrators have to face. And it's daunting. Now, some districts have been creative in terms of how you deal with these types of implications, the implications on how to deal with the students. For instance, here in the Pittsburgh area where we live, Pittsburgh Public Schools has found a way to work with a public-private partnership who raised over $400,000 and also got 500 laptop devices donated so that they can handle the needs of what ended up being about 1,600 students in their district that otherwise would not have been able to do that. Now they get Comcast. Comcast comes in and says, we're going to donate connectivity to 1,000 households so that you can do this within the Pittsburgh area. That's a very creative way to do that. They haven't stopped. They've now been able to handle it for 1,600 students, but their need is for 10,000. So they've gone to the Pittsburgh Technology Council and they're looking to raise that to 1 million. Is it a done deal? No. Will they be able to handle it with everybody and get everybody set up? We don't know. We'll find out. But we know that they're not the only ones. Could be you. I've heard recently similar situations in San Antonio and in other cities. They're large districts. They have issues. Small districts also have other issues related to lack of resource. And we're all dealing with the fact that state budgets have been hampered and therefore school budgets are hampered as well. So for districts all over the USA and elsewhere for that matter, many decisions have already been made. Some have been met with difficulty, and others were challenges that were done fairly well. But that was for 2019-20, and that school year is just about over. So now we have to look forward to the summer and 2021. And guess what? More decisions need to be made. I don't have to tell you that. I mean, I'm telling the people who have to make them, right? But what we have to realize is that what we see today might not be the reality even 30 days from now, let alone 4 months from now when it's time to have the students come back to school. We don't know whether the whole class is in person or distant learning. We're guessing on some level. If we decide to have people together in our schools, how do we keep social distancing, which we've been told is the way to keep students and everybody and parents healthy and staff healthy? Will the school buildings be able to handle the load? How do you need to change them? If you're doing distance learning, how are you going to optimize the learning capabilities? And in either case, how are you going to give the students the social aspects that they need and keep the communities together? And that's the stuff that you can think of that aren't unintended consequences. A lot of you have already been subject to Zoom bombing, which is something we never could have expected, where somebody comes into your online distance learning or meetings and suddenly takes them over and does graphics or some sort of sound in order to disrupt the meeting. That's difficult, and we really couldn't have expected that. The states have edicted? The states have created edicts that says when we can close or must close and when we can open. Here in Pennsylvania, I understand that they're currently expecting you to be able to open around July 1. Now, that may have changed since last time I saw it because I'm getting it from the press. But the reality is still here. We have a situation in front of us that's a little bit more challenging than normal. Well, let's call it a lot more challenging than normal. Now, Mike Callaghan works with me on some level, and I thank him for helping me host this today. We spent some time, both of us have spent time with districts, we spent time with students. As Mike mentioned, I spent a lot of time with PTAs all over the country, and in communities in various areas. And we think we've done our part with Confirmed in order to be able to enhance it for what is now the new normal, and to enhance it for things for the types of school activities that Mike mentioned before. But I think more importantly is we have these people who are with us today, these experts, who are the ones who can help you on specific items that are troubling you. With us today, our panel of experts includes Tyler Samstag. Tyler is the Director of Innovation for the Allegheny Intermediate Unit. For those of you who are not familiar with intermediate units, those are organizations that provide essential services to districts and schools here in Pennsylvania. If you're in other states, you probably have a similar type of organization that does the same thing. For instance, in New York, they call them BOCES, just to give you some sense. They are there. We have Dr. Mitchel Nickols, who's a professor, an author, and a columnist. He has a very broad set of expertise, including diversity and inclusion training for school districts, law enforcement, and other organizations. He's done executive leadership development, as well as leadership development for parents and for teens. He's got a PhD in curriculum and supervision from the University of Pittsburgh, and currently serves as an adjunct faculty member at Point Park University, as well as on the advisory boards at Point Park and at Penn State University. Joe Markiewicz is with us today. He's a senior consultant, master facilitator, and national youth trainer for building stronger communities. He has over 30 years of experience as a community coalition trainer, prevention planner, and motivational speaker in schools and communities around the United States. He's been a presenter at a number of national conferences, and he's served as on the statewide community coalition trainer for Kentucky statewide prescription drug overdose reduction initiative and in Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency. A little bit later, we're going to have Scott Gutowski with us. He's a director of K-12 industry solutions from Salesforce.org, and previously he was the chief information technology officer at Pittsburgh Public Schools. He also has a certificate in Six Sigma. So when he talks to us a little bit later, and with Scott, it's an interview that he and I recorded yesterday from his home, and he's going to talk to us about using business concepts to support education and how COVID has brought the fringe to the center. We'll talk a little bit about how to differentiate between the nice to haves and the must haves and the funding issues that affect them. And finally, he'll share an important resource that's going to help you open your schools successfully. And of course, I mentioned Mike Halligan. He's with me as a host. He's worked with school districts and various organizations with products related to student health, STEM programming, and school safety. Some of you may recognize him as a primary implementer of healthy tools in your schools, or from his development and delivery of Highmark Healthy High Five. He's a trained Marine, and he's an expert in implementing the CDC's 8-component coordinated school health model. So if that's not a panel of experts, I don't know what is. And for full disclosure, as you can probably tell by Mike's description, he and I are involved with Confirmed, one of the sponsors, actually with a couple of the sponsors, just so you know. But we're not going to be talking about sponsors today. We're going to be talking about your needs. So why don't I open it up with Doc Nickols. Doc, what are you hearing from your education colleagues about what their biggest challenges are in this pandemic, in this scenario that we're seeing right now?
Well, obviously, we go back several months now, and school districts have been grappling with the idea of how to move forward. There was a bit of indecisiveness early on, and then schools, of course, have been out. Some school districts around Pennsylvania especially went back before the end of the school year, but not many of them. They've also wrestled with the idea of how to applaud their seniors who are graduating this year. I think the bigger issues will still be in front of school districts at this point. There have been issues I've heard about in terms of curriculum, how to manage it, how to develop teams, how to make sure that faculty members in school districts understand how to use technology. Millions of dollars have been spent over the last 10 years or so in school districts. Now I think it's a more focused approach that has to be done. And so school districts are wrestling with this whole idea of what do we do, how do we do it, how is this going to possibly work in the fall? And that becomes a big issue because COVID, as I'll probably come back and talk about, is not our only issue at this point.
So Doc, have they prioritized to you what they put at the top of the list in terms of the thing that absolutely has to get handled first?
No, I have not heard too many talk about what has to be handled first. One particular district that I won't name in the greater Pittsburgh area was going to perhaps do some things on July 1, as many of the school districts are allowed to based upon the governor and the Department of Health. But I understand that particular district has pushed back things to August the 1st. My thinking is that's not going to give enough time. It's not going to give enough time for teachers. If they're not doing things during the summer, districts have to deal with the labor force, the labor unions, teachers unions, so on and so forth. They've got to figure out how they're going to do the busing. Those things are also very, very critical. And if they wait, if other districts wait until August the 1st, they're going to find themselves in a lot of difficult places. One example is perhaps some of the stuff that Joe also deals with, and that's in the area of how do we engage community? What kinds of conversations are happening with people who are stakeholders in communities at this point? While educators are wrestling with it, administrators, especially superintendents, principals, directors of special ed, so on and so forth, there needs to be some critical conversations with others who are stakeholders in this process, with families who don't either have the technology that you talked about Pittsburgh Public Schools is trying to get to their folks, but also as teachers have had difficulty understanding the technology. Imagine the process for people in communities who either don't have a Comcast offering 1,000 homes, which is not enough, or children, especially the lower ages. So there are some ideas that I have that can perhaps help school districts in that particular area.
So Doc, those are all very valid points, and we appreciate it. You mentioned innovation, or you mentioned technology and getting into the hands of the teachers, and it just so happens that that sounds like something that Tyler could probably help us with a little bit here as the Director of Innovation at AIU. Tyler, how has this changed for you in terms of getting the technology to the teachers, and how does it differ from the challenges you've had in the past related to teachers and technology?
So at the AIU, we support Allegheny County's 42 school districts. Our reach definitely extends beyond that. I think over the last handful of years, there's definitely been greater emphasis on leveraging technology for instruction. However, oftentimes it's associated with kind of the innovative teacher, whereas, mid-March, every teacher had to leverage technology. And so it was jarring for a lot of teachers who may not have considered themselves technology people. And so we hear that quite often. And so through the Allegheny Intermediate Unit, we do massive amounts of professional development every year. The COVID closures also forced us to rethink what professional development looks like. So the normal one-day sessions where educators from all over the county come together around a single topic simply would not suffice. And so oftentimes school districts will engage with us for a full day PD. This simply wasn't a scalable model. Early on, we had districts coming to us asking for us to onboard essentially all of their teachers around specific platforms. So I think the most common platform that has been leveraged in these past few months has been Google Classroom. And so if a district needed professional development around Google Classroom, it simply was not scalable on our end to dedicate an entire day to that single district, because the needs of that single district reflect the needs of districts across the county. And so we really were forced very quickly to rethink what professional development looks like. I think we did a really exceptional job in the past 3 months. Participation for professional development around remote learning exceeded 10,000. And so what that meant for us is we had to create PD that was modular, that was virtual, that was backed by research, and really supported teachers in their own agency, finding the path forward that works best for their needs.
So are you finding that you're mentoring the districts to start to use a common technology so that you can scale better, or are you still just following their lead and trying to support those various platforms that are out there?
So I think it's a combination of both. We're designing responsive support, so we're continuously in communication with superintendents, curriculum coordinators to get a strong grasp as far as what technologies they're using. With 43 school districts in the county, including Pittsburgh Public, we're never going to see a consensus on any single platform across the board, but we definitely have seen trends. Oftentimes those trends follow what is inexpensive or what is free, because there are truly a lot of incredibly free technologies out there. And so I think it's a combination of both at the end of the day.
So just real quickly before we head on to Joe for a sec, you mentioned that the standard, I guess the terminology that I was listening to, whether you said that or not, was sort of the standard run-of-the-mill teacher versus the technologically sophisticated teachers are starting to have to move forward. What about those who are laggards in technology? I know that I've heard some stories recently about people who have just been hiding behind other people helping them with the technology because they haven't either wanted to or felt comfortable even connecting, doing email, doing rudimentary things. How are those people being affected? Are they going to get washed out of the system in this point, or are they going to be brought along somehow?
I think the reality is we have seen just incredible work on behalf of teachers who have stepped up, who have had a desire to learn new skills, ultimately with their students' best interest in mind. Again, a lot of the PD that we have offered that have been attended have been voluntarily attended by teachers across the board. And so I do think that teachers have really stepped up in incredible ways, and how we have responded to ensure that we have supports for those teachers that you just described. Our PD was built around a modified framework of Google's Teach from Home framework, which was broken up into 5 concept chunks. Each concept chunk had explicit skills. So everything from planning for virtual instruction to conducting virtual instruction, and then the accessibility component. And then we had 3 tiers of support. The first was a curated set of asynchronous supports, because there's a lot of great content out there on the internet that we want folks to work through themselves. If they needed additional support, we had 30-minute virtual pop-up professional developments where folks could learn alongside peers across the county and beyond. And then if they needed additional support, we had one-to-one kind of tailored office hours. And so these were folks who were working through the creation of their Google Classrooms and needed that tailored support.
Do you think your model that you're creating now to handle this is consistent or similar to other models that are out there, or is this something that everyone in every individual area is just doing by themselves, whether statewide or nationally?
I think everything looks a little bit different at this point. I think what was unique about what we did early on is that we adopted frameworks that were pedagogically focused, and then we really were supporting teachers in ensuring that the pedagogy is their focus and technology is used to enhance it, as opposed to focusing on a specific technology and letting that guide what instruction looks like.
Okay, thank you. So, Joe, we talk a lot about the fact that it's all about the students, and I know that that's a lot of reasons that that a lot of educators have even gotten into it to help the students. You're involved more on the student level than perhaps most of the people that we know. Can you give me some sense of what you're seeing and what kind of effects are happening that perhaps the districts may or may not be seeing?
Right, and so I bank a lot of my information on the Pennsylvania Youth Survey, which is a valid and reliable survey instrument. It's been around in Pennsylvania since 2004. The last survey just came out in 2019. And I've worked with over 100,000 middle and high school students in 25 years across the country, but mostly in Pennsylvania. So I have a good sense of where they're coming from. So some current trends that we all need to be aware of, contrary to popular belief, drug and alcohol rate by young people has gone down. Teen pregnancy has gone down. Youth violence is trending down. School dropout, believe it or not, in most areas is actually going down, not all areas. But the one area that is an issue, and we should really take this into account looking forward, is the mental health issues that are going on with young people. Anxiousness, depression, sadness, lack of hope is actually on the rise and has been on the rise for about the last 6 years across the country. So when we look at people like Dr. Jean Twenge, who wrote a book called Generation Me, this is the first generation of students, our 6th through 12th graders, who are born and will die in the internet age. The rest of us learned the internet as we went through life. This is the internet age of youth. And some of the findings that came out of her book kind of concerned me, that our youth are more confident, college-bound, they're internet age people, that they have high self-esteem. At the same time, they're depressed, lonely, and they have high levels of anxiousness. And with the separation of relationship due to the COVID pandemic is really an issue for me. I think this is something we really need to look at and have some conversation about.
So just a point of clarification, a minute ago you named a number of factors that are going down. You're talking about during the COVID period they're going down, or just that's the general trend?
No, the trend has been 6 to 8 years.
Okay, so there's a 6 to 8 year trend of them going down. Has the COVID, or do we have any data yet that says whether the COVID scenario the last 6 to 12 weeks, depending upon where you live, have had any significant impact on the trajectory, either up or down?
So the next survey in Pennsylvania is in 2021 in the fall. And currently right now we have about 280,000 students in Pennsylvania in grades 6 through 12 who are taking the survey. That's over 1,135 schools across the state. So it's a good, valid, reliable, and they're all saying the same thing. I mean, you got 76% of students say they can talk one-on-one with their teacher. 81% of students can go to a teacher with a problem. So what happens when we remove that protective factor? And that's what I'm concerned about.
So I'm curious. I mean, you just made two statements. One about the fact that this social loneliness type of thing is becoming a more of an issue now, and you also said this is the first generation that's been entirely internet bred, so to speak. How do these jibe together? I mean, we all talk to our kids, or have talked to our kids, about spending too much time on the phone or with Facebook or with whatever. Are they not getting that as an outlook? Or are we finding different things about the way that those are affecting the students compared to what they were before?
And I think this is a science that is currently being developed, to be quite honest with you. I had a student say to me, I have an internet best friend. And I said, what is that? I've never heard. And I've worked with students for 25 years. And that's the first time I ever heard that. And they said, well, you have a best friend or a buddy, but you've never actually met them or talked to them. And that was interesting. But I think, David, this is all still currently being looked at, this situation.
Okay, and I guess in your world, we call this preventive sciences, right?
Absolutely.
What does that say about the importance of the personal connections between adults and youth? Is there any impact there, or any things that we can talk about related to, the up and down as opposed to the peer-to-peer?
So positive adult role models in a young person's life is absolutely critical. The Search Institute out of Minneapolis, Minnesota tells us that every youth should have a minimum of 5 positive adult role models to get to. And when I was a parole officer years ago in Pennsylvania, I had youth who I worked with, I couldn't find one positive adult role model in their life. So yes, that's vital. And the number one protective factor against youth suicide is a positive relationship and being connected to an adult. Number one protective factor.
Any adult, or an adult inside the family, or what, or a teacher? What are there any indications on that?
Any adult.
Any adult. So if we broaden out the question to anybody who wants to answer that, so let's talk about what the teachers are doing right now. They're sitting at home, or they have been sitting at home, perhaps trying to do distance learning with their students. Perhaps they've been off. Perhaps they've been doing some other work with them. What kind of relationships have the teachers and the students put together in that period? Has that changed at all? Is there anybody on this panel who can answer that?
I've heard from one or more teachers talking about their passion, especially as it relates to not just to the kids who would get it no matter what, but disparities exist in education. And there are studies that have been done a few years ago, we don't have time to talk about it today, by the University of Pittsburgh in the School of Social Work. Those disparities are health and economics and race-related, minority-related disparities. Now, there are some school districts that don't have what we would typically see or view as a minority or African-American population, but yet there can be disparities that exist economically for people who are indigent, who don't have a higher level middle income or higher level income in their families. So as we talk about COVID and the effects of COVID, and I thank Joe for what he has shared with us, some of the data that we will probably see by now, between now and 2021, it's probably going to enlighten us as to what happens. But we've got some critical situations to deal with now, because the COVID effect, as I've talked to some of my friends, social work, clinical psychology, so on and so forth, is an emotional thing. That there's a psychological factor that school administrators and teachers need to become aware of, as this is having an impact on students. And another quick thing I'll throw in there is this whole racial thing, this whole justice thing that's happening around the country right now, that is not just popularizing African Americans, but people of all races across America and across the world. And again, conversations. Susan Scott talked about fierce conversations in her book a few years ago. There are some conversations that school districts need to become equipped to talk about, to address in one form or another with the technology that Tyler's talking about, so that these things are not just swept under the rug as to the impact of COVID, as to also what does it mean in this new day when we're facing something that was similarly faced back in 1920 with the Spanish flu, that also in 1921, as some people are abreast of, that happened in the greater Tulsa, Oklahoma area, in that one neighborhood, Greenwood, that neighborhood where there was race involved. So we have a very interesting day, and we can ignore it if we want to, but it has an impact on Black students, brown students, white students. It has an impact on our student bodies. And those are some conversations we need to have in advance of September.
So I think you're right on all those issues. And bringing back, we're talking about things that happened before most of us were born. And that makes it more difficult for us.
All of us were born, so I have to get into that number. No, I wasn't born in 1921.
Okay. Well, I don't know who else is on the line here, but okay. The point is, it's not something that's generally part of our own demeanor that we've built into ourselves since birth. So is there a way that we could have anticipated that and just because of what happened before and been ready for it?
Now, if you're talking about in terms of COVID, I think the scientists, the health professionals have always tracked those kinds of pandemics that have happened, whether it was Ebola or something else. But the race things have, for whatever reason, been ignored. People haven't been comfortable talking about them in school districts. When I work with school districts, sometimes when I work in law enforcement, it's an uncomfortable conversation. Yet I urge people, let's have those conversations. Let's talk about how we approach it. Let's not ignore it. And when you have history classes or social studies classes not even addressing some of these things, I've been in school districts as a consultant and talked to teachers and talked to administrators, and the uncomfortable level that exists. It's like, well, how do we say this without making things worse? How do we do this without exacerbating? That's why you talk to people who are professionals in that arena also. I was a public school teacher many years ago. I've worked with students in after-school programs. I've worked with parents in communities. And there are people like me that need to be a part of that conversation.
Good point. Now, Joe, I know that you've worked with faith-based organizations as well. Do those have impact in this scenario that Dr. Nickols was just talking about?
Absolutely. And prevention science is very clear about the role of faith as a protective factor, not only for adolescents, but also for adults as well. There's over 500 international studies that all came to the same conclusion that a young person or an adult who's involved in organized faith activities 1 to 2 hours per week, whatever that looks like. It can be mission trips, it can be cleaning Mrs. Thompson's driveway out of her leaves on Saturday morning, it doesn't matter, but every week, 1 to 2 hours a week has a profound positive effect in a number of areas on young people and adults as well.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, I know that each of you has got some ideas that we can bring to the table for the attendees here. I'd like to take a break for a minute on this panel, actually for a little bit more than a minute. Yesterday I spoke with Scott Gutowski, who's involved with the nonprofit arm of Salesforce.com that deals with K-12s. And I was enlightened by the number of things that he's told me, and I know his organization fairly well. And he has some resources to bring to the table. So let's take a break. Let's go to Scott on that, and then after we talk with Scott, we can come back to the panel and get some ideas out on the table as well. Does that sound like something that'll work for y'all? Okay. So I'm gonna share my screen now, and this is Scott Gutowski from his home yesterday.
There's really two sides of education. There's the academic side of education, and then there's the business of education. Keeping the institution operating efficiently, thinking about cost, thinking about, staff services, and really thinking about just how do we, make incremental improvements. So there's undoubtedly, some elements of the traditional business model. You mentioned Six Sigma, like looking at, process improvements has been kind of a curiosity of mine. I care deeply about the academic side, but I also care, and this is particularly true for public education, care about the efficiency side as a taxpayer and as a parent of 2 kids. I want to make sure the districts that, I support and, think of are operating as effectively and efficiently as possible. So I've really kind of learned to kind of traverse both sides of that educational equation.
So uniquely, that sort of makes this conversation very interesting to me, because a lot of the things that we typically deal with in the education realm as educators and even as administrators have to do with the students, as they should be and continue to be.
Oh.
Now, you're working in a nonprofit wing of a commercial business, and supposedly that might bring you away from the student type of scenario. But what I'm hearing in all the conversations I'm having with educators and administrators is a lot of the challenges are on the administrative side, but they're also affecting the students. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's, everything's connected. I mean, a school as just one building or a district as one district is still, every service is connected to, service the students and service the families. So, and by and large, you are then, servicing the community, whether it be an independent school or a public school. So when I think about Confirmed as an application and as a service, the beauty of what Confirmed provides is adding more efficient context to scheduling and to providing an outlet to engage. Typically, that is going to be around student needs. I need to, meet with a parent. I need to meet about an IEP. I need to meet around the context of a situation that determines or dictates engagement. There's always, new and improved ways to establish new efficiencies in everything, in life and in business. So I think in education, my work is always anchored around the student. It is the product of education. If I worked for Nike, it would be the brand of Nike and everything that Nike did. But in education, it is the student and everything around the student. So our team at Salesforce, we think of it as a 360-degree view of a student's experience. And that academic side is supported by the business side. So something as fundamental as, let's say, recruitment and admissions in the life cycle of a student. It's more parent focused because it's typically the parents that are applying for schools, but schools intimately want to know the likes, the dislikes, the learning habits, the opportunities. Does this student know anybody else in this school? Do they have family members that have graduated from this school? Even if it's a public school, you want to know those contextual elements because it provides a richer picture to how to support that student. So it's, without question, both sides of the educational experience, the academic and the business are always connected. So, my work, works around that 360-degree view without question.
So you just mentioned the contextual view in the community and with people getting connected and all that. How does that, how does the pandemic and the situation that we've been in recently affect that? And what kinds of solutions are you anticipating that districts are going to be using in order to be able to handle those types of scenarios?
Yeah, it's an uphill battle without question. And I don't want to paint an overly rosy picture because, much of education's services are rooted in the traditional model of attendance, butts in the seats. Are
Right.
Kids physically in the seats? And how do we serve those physical, needs of those students? Now, you're working in a virtualized environment. And again, I don't want to paint an overly rosy picture here. A lot of the things I'm seeing across the nation, because my work covers, the entire American market, both, charter schools, private schools, and public schools. Many of the learning experiences we're seeing that are, brought online and virtualized are to service, many of the, general education needs, keeping kids on track, keeping them at grade level, and keeping them momentum. But the nation is really losing touch with, students with specialized service needs, English as a second language learners, mobility of students, individuals, families, or students that, maybe, in life situations that dictate that their living situations or their ability to stay connected to the school are suffering. Students, parents' cell phones changing, districts not having cell phones or not having accurate email addresses. Many districts are suffering right now because they've known about these things, but they've been kind of a fringe reality. Like, okay, it would be nice if we had 100% accuracy in all of our parent emails, all of our parents' cell phones, and all of the extended relationships to our students, grandparents, what have you, friends, relatives. We're seeing so many kids in learning contexts that are so dramatically different. And, they might be, with a grandparent or with an aunt or uncle, or between, situations because of the economic impact of, the country right now, that, a lot of districts, quite candidly, to put it concisely, David, are just losing touch with families, and they don't know how to stay intimately connected. We're seeing lots of surveys, we're seeing lots of robocalls, and those are great attempts, but the really intimate connections to kids are suffering deeply nationwide across the board.
So if we can take the tactical piece of that, because one of the things we're hoping to do here in this session today is provide some solutions where some of the educators and administrators from around the country can deal with those solutions better. So let's go back, if we could, to when you were running technology over at Pittsburgh Public. What percentage of your, I assume that means that you were involved with the database of students, and you were the guy who basically had bottom line responsibility for that. What percentage of the people were affected just off the bat before we went into this situation where you really had no good ways to be able to maintain continuous contact with them in a big district like that?
Yeah, I would say it's actually a high percentage. I would venture to guess that there was probably, 40 to 50% of our students, we had static in the data that we had. Whether it might, and some of that was due to, yes, the bottom line of our student information system data services rested in the department I managed. However, the functional day-to-day, the data entry, the dirty in, dirty out. I'm sure we've all heard this phrase of dirty data in, dirty data out. Much of the input of data was handled obviously at the schools. And, schools are very busy places, and, front offices are very busy places. And, one of the things that Pittsburgh Public Schools suffered from, and many, many districts suffer from, I don't want to pin this on them as being unique in this regard, is having really low barrier of entry, kind of dynamic ways to update, change, modify your contact details. It's just not something that is really like the norm in education because of what I said earlier. Education is a very physical first model.
Yeah.
So if you want to update your name or address, the majority of schools do that through the front office. You physically say, hey, I changed my cell number, I changed my address. And typically there's requirements to verify those details. Are you still in our tax jurisdiction? If you changed your address, are you still living in Pittsburgh Public Schools, or are you living in Baldwin, which is, maybe 2 streets away from a border that, is not really in the DNA of people to know about? So those, realities, caused a lot of static in, data. And that's not even mentioning, David, all of the other life circumstances, custodial disputes, protection orders against, this, mother or father is not allowed to have contact with this, their child or their foster child. How does that play out? again, most of that rested in just, knowing that the physical was always there. And that peace of mind was enough to keep some of those kind of surface, realities out there on the fringe. The COVID reality brought that fringe right into the center. And it's like, you've got to stare at it and look at the fact that, one headline I saw was the city of San Antonio. City of San Antonio, their public education school system indicated that they were losing touch with roughly 35% of their families because they didn't have the means to stay connected with them. Those headlines are I think a reminder of the realities of how our educational system needs to rethink that business side I was talking about to support the academic side.
Right, and that makes perfect sense. And what you were just talking about a second or two ago, I think of two quotes that I heard just in the past week or so. One from Dr. Hamlet, who runs Pittsburgh Public right now, and one from Joe Hart, who runs Dale Carnegie Training, which is adult education training.
Yep.
And both of them have said in no uncertain terms that they anticipated getting to this point, but it sounded like they were talking about getting to this point a decade from now, or maybe even more, or maybe a little bit less. And
Yep.
not today, that the pandemic has sort of pushed it on them where they suddenly had to do things very, very quickly.
Yeah. Well, I think there's nice to haves and then there's must haves in every situation. And public education, let's just zero in on public education, which is, roughly, 90% of the market across the US. Public education really struggles just to focus on the must haves. Counselors, social workers, teachers, safe buildings that have air conditioning, like buildings that are, welcoming learning environments. Those are all on the must-have, if you put it on a scale, those are all on the must-have side. Innovative teaching styles, professional services to really learn how to engage, today's, students in ways that, you might have a teacher that, was brought up in an analog first lifestyle, and now they're teaching in a digital first society. So that requires a lot of professional supports and a lot of, pedagogical shifts to support that. So the nice to haves were the, family engagement technologies, or the, we're in the business of CRM, constituent resource management. How do you know the full picture of everything that is at the center of the constituent you're trying to support? In the private sector side, that is your customer. You want to know everything about your customer. You want to know what's their favorite color, what side of the bed do they sleep on. The more information you have about your customer, the better you can sell to them. In education, those details on the nice to have been being squeaked out of the funding because it's not really advantageous to fund, a digital engagement platform for parents and family members as much as it is to fund a physical teacher. Like that physical teacher and that physical must-have need is always going to win. But again, this pandemic has pushed those nice-to-haves right into the center of the conversation. And, quite candidly, it's a necessary conversation to have if we think about the future of education and how do you stay connected to, again, that full 360-degree view of the students 365 days a year. Like summer, evening, weekends, we've got to stay connected to our families and our students.
I have to assume that part of those must-haves has to do with getting that database up to speed, because at this point you have fewer connection points to the parents and to the students because they're away from the schools, or they have been for some time period, and they may be at the beginning of the next school year. Is that a reasonable assumption?
It is a reasonable assumption, but again, it goes back to the who is, doing this work, because right now, it would be different if this was just an economic collapse and, teams could still physically collaborate and figure out, all right, tactically, what do we do first? What do we do second? How do we do it? I'm also seeing a lot of just, school districts struggling with how do they make decisions? What improvements are necessary and how do we prioritize, those decisions? I'm thinking back to my, many of my former roles. There were lots of individuals that were very used to coming into an office, sitting in front of a desktop, and doing their work.
Yeah.
At 4:30, they would log out of that computer and leave. Do they have laptops at home? Do they have connections at home that allow them to stay dynamically connected? So many of the needs to improve the state of affairs that we're in also rely on employees to have the ability to do so. So it's a real struggle across the board, both in terms of spirit of work, but actually getting the work done.
So before we get into some of the resources that are available, just one quick thing to just to extrapolate on that. So you're talking about potentially teachers not having resources. You're talking about the scenario that decision-making has to change. We talked a few minutes ago about the whole concept of collecting data and having accurate data. 40% in public schools potentially wrong, according to what we were just hearing. Maybe plus or minus, right? That's a significant issue in this environment where the people are not there. Would you suggest some sort of methodology change or push out to get different people to be involved in the process? How would you anticipate districts, just little things like collecting the data, because without knowing who the people are, then everything else falls apart. How would you go about making changes now based on where we are and what we anticipate into the next school year?
Yeah, I would say two things. One, very quickly. Let me just unpack that kind of finger in the wind 40% that I threw out there. I don't want to state that 40% is wrong. I want to state that 40% is, and I think that is actually a very conservative number. I just want to say that it's dramatically limited. So if I have a single phone number for a student, I don't have a cell number, I don't have an email, I don't know if they live with a mother and father, I don't know if they live with an extended, family member in the house, do they live with grandparents? You need a really complete picture. And to get that complete picture, this is my second point to your question, you need to extend the outlet of engagement points. So if a teacher hears during a parent-teacher conference, my son or daughter actually stays with their grandparents on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday because I work a swing shift and those are that is a very important fact that we need to put someplace. Yeah. Or, they're not with me on the weekend, or they're with their father every other weekend, or with their mother every other. Like one of our good friends, every 2 days during this COVID situation, they're going back and forth between mother and father, mother and father. Those little nuances are really vital to understand how to support your students. And those details are just not there. And they're not there in some cases because maybe the system itself isn't designed to really support that kind of flexibility. It's always been pinned on one individual, the front office or the secretary, to input that data. So the whole kind of methodology of how to engage, how do you vet, how do you input, how do you kind of ferret out the full picture of student needs, it needs to be widely kind of distributed and rethought, and that's a hard ask.
So you're talking about rethinking the process, you're talking about rethinking the training of who's on the end so that they know how to collect it and what they need to be listening for and what they need to be looking for and how they need to act once they hear that. I suspect you're probably also talking about empowering them through whatever methodology, whether it's access to the database or some sort of person that they can go to. I mean, this sounds like a very complicated issue.
It's immensely complicated. And, let me just frame it in kind of the circumstances of the current state of affairs in many, many school districts. The student information system, which is your hub, your nucleus of information about your students, is a very guarded, sacred data structure. You don't want inaccuracies in that. You don't want, take for example, having to bid an inaccurate address, wrong thing, pieces of mail are going to the wrong address. So that data structure is highly guarded in terms of who can update and change information within that structure. So now we're talking about, hey, we need more, ears on the street so that we can get the accurate picture of our students, not just accurate cell numbers, but life circumstance scenarios that I discussed earlier.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting that information be blown out. So every teacher, every counselor, every social worker has edit and, manipulation rights in a student information system. But you need to kind of build technologies and solutions around how do you, say, hey, we need to look into this, or we need to, I think this is her cell number. I think this is their email address, or this is what I learned at the, parent-teacher conferences. It's not just about the technology. It's very much about the DNA of how, educators and the whole business of education, the office, the front line, the teachers, how do they all engage in very intimate ways? And we haven't even talked about time. Like, time is a challenge. Like, there aren't enough hours in the day to do everything that every school building and school district needs to service. So finding those, I mentioned this word earlier, finding those efficiencies are really kind of the big need, but that is so hard to do in education.
So just quickly before we wrap up, thank you for your insights on this. Quickly before we wrap up, I want to talk a little bit about resources. And I know that one of the resources that I've been looking at is work.com, which was put together by your organization. And you work for the nonprofit branch of a very large, very fast growing commercial enterprise at salesforce.com. You're at salesforce.org. Talk to us a little bit about work.com and how it fits into the picture, and what other resources besides work.com you might think of that might be of interest.
Yeah, so I mean, just quickly in 20 seconds, our CEO, Mark Benioff, who is over salesforce.com and in the nature of hierarchy also over salesforce.org, says very succinctly, businesses should be able to do well, but they should also do good. And that's what salesforce.org is. We're trying to do good by having a philanthropic wing to our business that is about leveraging our technology. And, so work.com is a suite of features and services that, our business side put out very succinctly. The economy can't open unless all of the economy can open. So that means the business side and the public sector side. So, and we on the .org side say, look, our economy is not going to get back into operation until schools are operating at a 100% safe and understood capacity. And I have two kids, a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, and they've been, behind that door every day of the week for the past 3 months. I'm trying to homeschool and, work my professional day-to-day job. It's challenging. So work.com is a set of services that we released in an effort to get businesses back onto their own 2 feet. So, contact tracing, health, service checks, how is David feeling today? Has there been anyone, infected in your proximity? Have you come across it? Much of it is self-acknowledgement, but that, business need, there's no real application on the market to service that business need.
Right.
The beauty in our technology is Salesforce is 100% dynamic, 100% customizable, everything from workflows to pick lists. We think of ourselves as a big box of Legos. You can build anything out of Legos. I mean, if you want to build a refrigerator, you can build a refrigerator out of Legos. I mean, but sometimes the challenge there is people need instructions. Yeah. And, in education, the market is very used to turnkey solutions. Like, what does this software do? How do you set it up? You guys do the training. We'll use the service. So work.com is, an effort to, pin, some very fundamental things. I mentioned too, the other one is, kind of just a command center. Like, what do our buildings look like? When were they last clean? Was there anyone in building A that was actually, infected with COVID, or was there any kind of exposure there? So you're talking about students, you're talking about families, you're talking about physical, buildings. Work.com is an effort to try to, really help businesses reopen and help the public sector reopen. We've been seeing, tremendous interest in it, but we're also realists that, we don't know what the fall is going to look like. So right. It's a little bit of both anticipation, but also kind of crystal ball, reading, if you will.
Yes, and hopefully we've all got good crystal balls that are clear and ready to make those estimates. Anyway, Scott Gutowski, Director of K-12 Industry Solutions for Salesforce.org, the nonprofit arm of Salesforce.com. Scott, thanks for being with us.
David, happy to be here. Thanks.
So let's go back to our other panel at this particular point, and let's take a couple minutes. And you heard Scott. We know we've talked here a little bit. We know that there are a lot of different types of educators and administrators online with us today. If I can ask each of you to take a couple minutes and just give us your most important suggestions as how they should be dealing with what's likely to be ahead based upon what you're seeing and your experiences. Joe, I know that you've stayed with us despite the fact that you've got someplace to be. I'll set you up for first.
So a lot of the work that I've been doing across the country, I actually just got back from Hawaii working with homeless youth there, is trying to problem solve our way through a lot of things, substance use, suicide. And my thing that has always worked for me to be successful is to give the problem to the students and let them do their think tank on it and brainstorm and think outside the box. You'll get ideas you never even considered. But unfortunately, we're in a situation where we're not in large groups to do this at the current time. But I say students are part of the solution. They're part of the answer. And if we could somehow get them together and gather their thoughts and dig through the stuff that's doable and what isn't doable, you'd be surprised with some of the ideas that they come up with. So all I'm saying is to engage the students in this process somehow, however that works.
Yeah, that's a great idea, Joe. And just as a matter of how that works, my daughter she just graduated recently from the University of Pittsburgh, and they've asked her to work with them in order to be able to do polling to make sure that when they have a solution for next semester, that it's optimal. So she's been spending a lot of time working with the deans and with the administrators of the university, just like you're saying. And it sounds like they're coming up with solutions that they might not have come up with had they not had those discussions.
That's correct.
That's a great idea. Thank you, Joe. Dr. Nickols, can we, before you said you had some ideas, so if you would share those with us.
Well, one of the things that I'll say very quickly is a model that I'm trying to develop or looking at that I'll call SET, S-E-T, Strategic Educational Triage. And it's based in part on something that someone can find in the Journal of Ethics /AMA, American Medical Association. Well, when we look at people in a triage situation, we determine the idea of decision-making that somebody talked about earlier. I taught decision-making at the doctoral level, taught decision-making at the master's level. Decision-making is critical. So finding out where the pockets, where the gaps are, where the disparities are, so that we reach, yes, the children, Joe, but we also begin to connect with those parents who are in situations that they don't know what to do at this point. So while schools are doing all of the scurrying to try to see what they put into place on the educational side, I would urge, and I've worked with communities, work with parents, work with students who, white and Black, were struggling in school, and help them to succeed with their high school diploma in a number of school districts, that we need to also work on something like that. And again, one model that I'm looking at developing is called SET, Strategic Educational Triage.
Thank you. Strategic Educational Triage. Excellent. Tyler, can we turn it over to you?
Certainly. So in terms of supporting teachers in developing for this new norm, I think it's going to be a reality that the role of the teacher is going to change radically, whether it's hybrid instruction, whether it's in-person instruction or fully virtual instruction. And for district leaders who are looking to support an entire district worth of teachers in learning new technologies, learning new instructional practices, I say turn to the teachers. In every district we're seeing teachers step up. There's this new crop of innovative teacher and what that innovative teacher looks like. And I think my suggestion is to really provide those teachers an opportunity to elevate the best practices. We're seeing some really incredible stuff come out, and teachers are doing a really great job at networking across district lines and supporting, regional approaches to teaching in this virtual environment.
Thank you, Tyler. And finally, Mike, we heard you at the beginning and haven't kept you on the panel much, but I know that you've got your ideas on this as well.
Yeah, I really like Scott's. Everyone's explanations of everything are so keen and right on. I think about that 360 degree view of the student, and the way that comes across for me is through the coordinated school health model, the 8 components of coordinated school health, which is an evidence-based model created by the Centers for Disease Control and others. But that really puts the student in the center. Focused on academic achievement, but taking those 8 components of health education, physical education, health services, nutrition services, counseling and psychological services in school, okay? We talk about school health environments. Scott really referred to kind of some of those things for school health environment, and just staff health and wellness for teachers. And then lastly, the community and family involvement in schools. And I think what's so important about that, the resources that extend beyond through the use of community and family involvement in schools, your education foundations within your school district. If you don't have one, create one. And use those people, the businesses that by extension can create financing and funding for different things that schools may not have, but that can come from the community. There are so many things, the resources, the collaboration, the collaborative boards that are available, I think are so important. And then the mentorship that Joe really referred to in kind of talking and connecting with adults, I think is so important to be able to connect. I mean, this is all hitting all of us. I know it's hit my family. I kind of think about, the movie My Cousin Vinny. My dad was a teacher. My 2 uncles were teachers. My sister was a teacher. So they say, were you a teacher? Well, in some instances, yeah, I've actually been in schools, taught teachers, taught students. My background with that, over the years has been more with the electronic health record systems and working with school nurses. And, all of that is going to change. Everyone's role changes. School nurses are going to be a vital part, I think, of what continues to happen in this environment with schools. So the health services element is also going to be a huge component of, connecting, especially with IEPs, the individual education plans, and focusing on those things. And, the schools really kind of monitoring I know they already do this, the technologies that are being used at home by these students. How far are they going? What's being said and what's being communicated back and forth between students is all telling, and all information that can be gained, and the data that comes from that, the data intelligence, and to use that intelligence to make informed decisions.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Tyler. Thank you, Dr. Nickols. Thank you, Joe. And our remote thanks to Scott Gutowski. Shannon Gregg's been scurrying behind the scenes. We thank you, too. And she'll be on one of our future sessions as a panelist in one of her areas of expertise as well. For those of you who have just been listening to all this, you want to talk to the people who are here on the panel, we're going to be sending out contact information and LinkedIn profiles to each of the people who have registered for this session. You'll be getting that by email. Now, the COVID Economy Leadership Forum, which is what this is part of, there are 4 sessions. It continues tomorrow, where we talk about working with businesses, travel-oriented issues, some law enforcement sensitivity issues, and dealing with change. Dr. Nickols will be joining us again, as well as 3 other experts in those areas. And then a little bit later on, we've got some other sessions, one of them about selling in the new normal, because, look, businesses need to be able to make money in order to be able to continue to help the economy thrive. So we're tackling that head on. So if you know people who are looking to enhance their customer base or their revenues in some sort of commercial enterprise, we've got that for them. For anybody who's doing Zoom meetings, we've got a seminar coming up next week called Being More Successful with Zoom. Or I don't know if that's the exact title of it, but that's basically what it's going to be. We're going to cover issues with participating more successfully. We're going to be talking about hosting. We're going to be talking about presenting more effectively during those. It's going to be a rounded conversation, and I think you'll like that. And I've got some surprises for you on that one. We will be posting this session on YouTube. So please subscribe to the Confirmed YouTube channel. I think it's Confirmed app is what you want to look for in order to find it. You subscribe it, you'll get full information as each of these go up. We will be sending you information specific to this particular session as well, since you've participated. We thank you all for being here. Remember, you're the guys you're the people on the front line who are making it all happen for the students. And as Scott said earlier, we need both the business and the education arms to be up and running effectively for this economy to be working. And we thank you all for everything that you do. Have a great day today, and we look forward to seeing you in future sessions.